Okay, and here are some of the effects I mentioned with that. But of course, emotional distress. I mean, if you want to get depressed, deal a lot with toxic people. It'll drain you of your emotional resources, your psychological resources. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the way it works. Anxiety, depression, stress. Keep in mind too, I know I've been talking about family and friends. Okay. What about people at work? I'll bet you've run into in your careers a few people that are toxic at work. And that can be trickier, can't it? Because you still have to figure a way to work with them and deal with them, but protect yourself at the same time. It's like a balancing act. You know, how do you do that? You know, and maybe we'll talk about that if you have some questions. Families like that too, though, isn't it? It's like, you know, you've got family and you've got Aunt Ruth, who is just negative nanny, and she just ruins the holidays and stuff, but she always shows up for those family get-togethers, right? How do you deal with that? Because you're going to get exposed to it, and your children are going to get exposed to it too. So, you know, what do you need to do to kind of protect yourself there? Because you can't always totally exit out of that relationship either. Friends are a little different. You can ditch a friend. Sorry, you know, politely, but you know, if they're toxic, leave them behind, folks. Sorry, you can't. Here's one thing. We're going to talk again a little bit about just very briefly about personality disorders. Personality disorders are essentially patterns of behavior, thinking, and emotion, and especially relating to other people that are toxic by nature. And we're talking about folks, if they're an adult, they've had this pattern. Let's say they're 25. They probably had this pattern for at least 15 years. Okay, this stuff starts early a lot of times. And if they're 50, they've probably been doing it for 30 or 40 years. Okay, these things, you know, build. So what we're talking about, unfortunately, if it's at the stage of being a personality disorder, which often it is, narcissism especially, you're not going to fix that. The rule of thumb, if those folks go to therapy, they need at least 2 years being met weekly to make a dent in it. So just to give you an idea. So if you know some folks that are really, and I'm not saying they don't have needs, and some of them are struggling and they're not damaged and not scarred themselves, because you know probably they are. What I'm saying is, from a practical sense, if they're truly that far gone, you're not equipped to deal with it. You're not equipped to help them change them. And you'll probably find out if you've dealt with some toxic people when you've tried. You know, just think about, well, how well did that work out? It didn't, did it? No. And I'm talking about a mental health professional that is going to spend at least 2 years, right? And I've been there, done that. Okay, I can tell you that it's hard to get people out, because one of the problems with toxic people, especially when we get into personalities, they don't have a problem. You got the problem, or the boss has a problem, right? More things. You know, they don't see a problem. And again, if they don't see a problem, they don't acknowledge a problem, well, by golly, they're not going to invest any energy in making any changes, are they? So I'm just telling you, this is a difficult nut to crack if you want to help people. What is it? I came across a meme. I love memes. Came across a meme that said you cannot rescue a person who is not willing to participate in their rescue. Say that again. You cannot rescue a person who is not willing to participate. Isn't that true? You can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped. That's another one. All right. Some other ways. Again, if we're talking about someone that is really significant in your life, not only can we look at maybe depression, anxiety, stress, et cetera, but low self-esteem, because you're going to feel bad about yourself. Because a lot of the junk that they do, they're not going to take responsibility for, but they're probably going to aim it at you. And if you're, I always used to say, be careful not to buy other people's garbage. You need to throw it out. Right? But if it's someone you really care about, you really love, you can get caught up in it, right? Especially if it's a close friend or a family member. So your sense of self-worth and self-esteem there. Obviously, strained relationships, and this can happen in a couple of things. It can happen with the toxic person because they're creating usually a lot of drama, and if they tend to have a strong narcissistic streak, they're going to push back and blame you for whatever's going on, right? So we might have friction right there with that person. But the other thing is it could cause problems like if you've got a friend, right? And they're looking in on your relationship as a couple, and they're saying things and giving you advice and so forth that is toxic. Boy, that can cause, friction between the two of you, right? And in some cases, it can split up marriages too. Ladies, guys, let me caution you. If you're having difficulties with your spouse, don't be getting advice from your friends that have been through a divorce. They already are so biased, they cannot give you good advice. Okay. And I'm not even saying some people can't justify their divorces. I'm not saying that. But just be very careful. Because we've seen situations where a couple's having difficulty, and I'm going to pick on the ladies for a minute. And the lady has friends, and they're going out for lunch and doing different things. And one of them's divorced, and then the other one's going through a divorce. So what kind of advice do you think they're going to give someone who's having some struggles in their own life? So be very careful when you get advice.
Or to take that a step further, they might not even be divorced, but it's like, what is their relationship? Because like Lee and I have talked where we've noticed that, like, where I wouldn't want to be friends with that woman if my marriage would end up being the same way that her marriage is.
Yeah.
And whether or not she realizes it or not, she's going to feed into my,
yeah,
you know what I mean? And,
yeah.
and I would want to treat Lee differently than she treats her spouse.
Yeah, no, that's very good. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Again, another angle, very dangerous. Very dangerous. Yeah, be careful who you listen to. Because one of the unfortunate things is if we're having negative thoughts about our spouse, we're usually very open to hearing negative things about them, And that's not being very objective, is it? And if you're making decisions about your family, your spouse, you really need to be as objective as possible. Be careful of people who will feed negative emotions, even if it kind of feels on the surface like they're giving you emotional support, because they might have an ulterior motive, or they might be just biased in their view. So be careful who your friends are. And again, watch your children and your grandchildren's friends too. Especially nowadays with all the crazy stuff that's going on, and all the stuff that they're exposed to. There's so much sick stuff out there that we can't even call mental illness now, because if we do, well, we're bigoted and we're homophobic, and remember I mentioned Jordan Peterson? Remember him? A few of you know who he was, a Canadian psychologist who's been really outspoken. Very conservative. I think he's on the border of being a believer. I mean, he's real close, and been very, very, very negative about Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada. Well, they're trying to take his license away, as I told you. Well, the court met about a week ago, and the verdict was yes, Jordan Peterson has free speech, but remember the yes butters. But the school has the right to discipline him. So they want him to go through, I would call it a gulag, re-education. Now you hear that in communist China, you used to hear it in Russia, but they sent people to re-education camps. So he's supposed to go through a course of being sensitive on the web about his tweets and his posts and his videos and stuff like that. It's going to be interesting to see where this goes because he is ticked off. Sometimes it's okay. There is justifiable anger here. This is very unjust what they're trying to do. But see, for a psychologist, that's about the biggest threat you can make as far as reputation and identity is to say we're gonna take your license away. Because technically, if they take your license away, you're not even allowed to call yourself a psychologist anymore. You have a PhD maybe, but you call yourself doctor. You can't. Anyway, just a little update. I don't know why these things pop in my head. I just spit them out. Okay. Strained relationships, obviously the conflicts we were just talking about. Isolation. Some people will withdraw. They'll just, especially if we're thinking about people in family situations, or maybe even in a marriage, where it's just year after year after year getting this angle from these toxic people. It can just wear you down. I have seen ladies. And again, I don't advocate divorce. I've never recommended divorce to people. I have recommended periods of separation. And I have had people who have decided to divorce without me recommending it. Okay, so let me say that. But I have seen ladies who have been married 20 years. One of them was married 30, maybe 34 years, with very narcissistic husbands who were just always emotionally abusing them. There were some other things going on too, I won't go into, but we'll just stick with the emotional abuse. And they were just shadows of themselves, and they just put up with it. The husband of the one lady who was married for like 34 years, he had already basically corrupted the opinions of all his children, which there were about 5. So they were on his side. And that's what narcissists do, by the way. They want to control you, and they want to control others' opinion. And so anyway, she put up with all kinds of emotional abuse and so forth for 34 years. And then suddenly one day, it's like a light bulb went on. She said, "That's it," and she left. And I've seen that happen a good number of times over the years, where people have been in, and it can happen to men too. Don't get me wrong. Where they've been in those situations, and they finally, it's like a light bulb goes on, they hit a wall or something happens, and they're just gone, and the husband is just left like, what happened? I don't understand what was wrong, because again, he's a narcissist. Anyway, sorry. Doubt and insecurity, again, these ladies I'm using as an example, and cause people to question their own thoughts, their own decisions, their own abilities. Because remember, if a narcissist, I'm sorry, I keep using that as an example. If a narcissist wants to control people, they want to keep them down, right? The narcissist wants to come across like, I'm bigger, more powerful than you. I know more than you. I'm smarter than you, right? I know what's best, and you need to be subservient to me. And so keeping them down, often there's all kinds of tactics that are used I won't get into, but if you're interested in that, you can go on the web and look up some things regarding gaslighting. That'll cover a lot of it. Actually, I'm going to touch on that a little later today too. And mental exhaustion, again, just the stuff that just drains you over time. You know, I don't think God intends us to be in those kind of relationships, honestly. Of course, if it's a couple, try to work things out, of course. These are some actual personality disorders: the narcissistic, the antisocial, and the borderline. These are ones that easily fit into, the toxic category there. The narcissist obviously wants to be in control. They have a lack of empathy and a sense of entitlement there. And they want to usually be the focus of attention. That's another quality that some of these folks have. They want to be the focus of attention, and they don't want to share it. That's one of the reasons why a lot of them have difficulty celebrating when you have victories, because they're not the focus of attention. You are. Just none of them. And then, of course, we have antisocial, which would fit more in that psychopathic, sociopathic, right? Don't have any concern about rights of others. I mean, they have a right to do pretty much whatever they want, but don't worry about other people's rights, and they're manipulative, and again, lack of conscience. Those folks, you want to stay far away from those folks. What's interesting about some of these folks that are toxic is they can come across the narcissists and sometimes even the antisocial folks. They can come across as very charming, when you first meet them, and they just seem very likable, But if you get close to them, you start seeing what's really going on. But if you talk to the neighbors, oh, he was always polite and quiet. He just murdered 18 people, but Ted Bundy, borderline personality. This is somebody that's really emotionally unstable. They're very volatile emotionally. They'll run hot and cold. Also, they'll view you. One day it's like you're the best thing since sliced bread, and then the next day you're Hitler's brother. It can shift like that, and there's no rhyme or reason to it either. It isn't that you did anything different than you do every day. It's inside them, and believe it or not, that's a silly exaggeration, but it's really not much of an exaggeration for folks that struggle with borderline. Real intense, impulsive behavior. They've got a fear of abandonment, but the stuff they do, and they usually link up. If they link up with a man like to marry, it's usually someone that's also, I'll be polite, very tolerant. Okay, because no one else will put up with behavior, honestly.